And I typically do these rolling intros now that we just start talking as opposed to the formal introductions, because it's so much more, relaxed and chill. But for the benefit of the handful of people who don't know who you are, and I looked up the official bio again to not make any mistakes, but owner and chief instructor of Core Self-Defense Krav Maga, which is a training center. And then a bunch of accolades that I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am going to mention the Bachelor of Science in Education, Master of Science in Professional Counseling, and a doctorate in psychology, which means that Tammy actually knows what she's talking about, as opposed to a whole lot of people in the self-defense world, including me, who doesn't have that education. But the reason I say it is because I'm going to get back to that in a little bit. But you mentioned something recently on, I think it was your Instagram, and I'm pulling up the quote here. You got some feedback from some people who were at one of the seminars, I think, and they asked for less science. And your response was, if you're teaching self-defense, physical or proactive, it doesn't matter. The science is crucial to understanding who we are, how we react, and what cool shit we are capable of accessing. And I really love that quote. Would you be willing to expand upon that a little bit?
Sure. So it was one piece of feedback. So it wasn't a whole bunch of people, but I was really struck by it. I was like, wait, what? But it was eye-opening for me as well, because I can have a narrow perspective on, people and us and all that, like we all can, right? Our biases. Yeah. Like, I love the science. Everybody loves the science. So it was good feedback that somebody was like, yeah, dial that down just a little. But the fundamental response was like, yeah, that is not happening. So we are, the best way to encapsulate this maybe is when my clinical degree, which was my master's degree, I graduated in 1990. So I'm that old. That was degree number 2. So that tells you something. And what we knew then, like just the whole concept of like neuroplasticity, was voodoo science. It was voodoo, weird, fringe. John Kabat-Zinn, who was a physician, who was bringing mindfulness into modern Western medicine at the time. Most people didn't speak out of school about him because he was so well healed professionally. But, the side murmurs were like, whoa, meditation, woo. So, that's where things were at then. And now, like we have science, we understand why hypnosis works, for example. We understand that meditation changes brains, blah, blah, blah. So it's just, what we've learned in the period of time, even since I went back and did my doctorate degree, is just light years from what we knew when I was in my clinical degree. And so what we're going to know in 5 years from now is, I expect, to be mind-blowing and to prove most of what we're saying now is wrong, right? Because we have such a limited capacity in technology for studying the human brain and the physiology interactions that we talk about all the time in self-defense, because we talk about the concept of the survival stress response. And then, we talk about adrenalization, and all of that takes us into the world of neurochemistry, biology, anatomy, and, the hormonal influences and all that kind of stuff. So the science is essential, because it also helps us begin to understand better why we do the shit that we do, and how we can educate and train into something more useful, more efficient, more effective, especially if we're talking about physical aspects of self-defense. So,
and I mean, you with the amount of academic work that you've done already, how do you keep up? Is it like reading papers, reading research? That's a lot what I do in my field a lot. But how do you keep up? Where do you find your sources for people who are interested in, like, okay, Tammy has a point here. How can I, as an individual, keep up?
That's a really great question. It's because research is now sort of running at this like hyper light speed
Yeah.
with like new technology. Everybody latched onto it and then off they go. And like, it would be a full-time job and you still wouldn't be able to keep up with all of the peer-reviewed journal research that's out there. So I basically anchor into a couple of podcasts that I know are going to reflect things that are accurate. And you know, I pick and choose my titles in some respects, depending on the podcast, so that I'm listening to things that I think might be germane to what we're doing. And then if it's like, oh, that's good, then chase down the resources. And then I will go into that deeper dive. So, because otherwise, it's so like one of my favorite podcasts right now is, and he's actually like exploded in the podcast world just since he started. He's only been around like maybe 2 years, and that's Huberman Lab. So Huberman, right?
Same here. He's awesome.
He is, and for me, he's like a meta-analysis. You know, so if you're reading a study, this is a meta-analysis. We've looked at all the studies out there around X, Y, and Z, or we reviewed 50 studies on this topic. And so the researchers then pull together their ideas and, you know, summarizations of what they think all that means. So he's kind of like my meta-analysis study that I get to listen to and then decide if I'm going to chase something down from that. And then I go follow the rabbit trails and read stuff. So one of the things that got me really hooked on him is his high praise of Robert Sapolsky, who I'm a huge fan of, particularly his book Behave, because it's easy to read. It's one we recommend for people who are going to take our course for instructor development, because again, somebody super, super intelligent, way smarter than I am, who's a researcher, who has access to all of the technology and all that kind of stuff. And he's pulled all this stuff together and went, here's a book.
Yeah.
Read this. You know, so when I ran across, somebody recommended Huberman to me, and so I was reading through some of his stuff he'd done, and then saw, oh, you like Sapolsky. Sapolsky, I never say his name right. I'm like, I'm in. I shall listen to you. So really, there's no way to 100% stay completely current with what's out there unless it's your full-time job. And even so, you're going to miss a paper. So that's it. Find those nice little caches of people who are smart and who are going to provide, like, hey, this is stuff that I read, or here's an interview with, you know, this fantastic guy who's like one of the key people doing post-traumatic stress research on the West Coast or whatever. So
yeah, for me, it's pretty similar. I mean, I think this is one of the keys in our day and age that we're living right now, which is, I guess, what our children are used to. But a lot of us, I mean, older folks, I'm 50 plus now, so I can say it. Is that we have to figure out where do we get our information, because there's so much crap out there, or limited information, or information that only covers a specific angle, or has like this agenda that's being pushed a little bit or a lot. And that is why I like Huberman so much, because as far as I can tell, he doesn't really push an agenda. And he's actually quite careful in saying, like, look, folks, I don't mean to be political or blah, blah, blah. Or he always caveats a lot of his stuff. Mm-hmm. And what you mentioned as well, what I like so much is that when he talks about studies and research, he says, like, okay, this is the limitation of this research. It's about there were only X number of participants, or they only look at this aspect, and gives a lot of context, and then eventually gets to a big picture. And like you said, then he gives the resources, the links, like you can look up the study here. Mm-hmm. You want to go deeper with that subject. Here you go. And managing that, I think, is a skill set that you know everybody should develop, as opposed to just what I hate. And I'm guessing it's similar for you, is when you look at a newspaper, or whether it's online or on paper, and there's like new study discovers that XYZ. And then and it's like this huge clickbait headlines, like, oh my God, coffee is bad for you. Oh no, coffee is good for you, and so on the day after. But And then you look at the study itself, and there's maybe 1% truth in that headline, and the study says something completely different. So anyway, I'm rambling, but the reason why I wanted to bring up the science is because it's so difficult, not just finding your information, but also the replication crisis has been going for 10 plus years. A lot of the science that we thought was pretty solid turned out to be pretty shaky. I mean, for instance, some of the Alzheimer's studies that happened, like the fundamental one that put all the Alzheimer research in one direction, turned out to be a fraud. The French guy, I forget his name, but he basically faked the study. So that's 10 wasted years. And it turns out that a lot of the original work that was done cannot be replicated, which is an interesting topic in and of itself. And we talk about unconscious bias, apparently that original study that brought forth the concept turned out to be not something you can replicate. I haven't looked as deep as I'd like to in all that kind of stuff, because like you said, it's a full-time job. You have to dedicate so much time to it, and still you can't say, okay, now I know everything, because the day after a new study comes out, that proves you're wrong. And there's a long way of asking. If you look back to when you started training and teaching as opposed to now, or when you look at your studies and how things have changed now, like what would be, for instance, a few radical shifts in thinking, paradigm shifts, or information that you say, like, okay, this is no longer valid. We know now that it's different.
Oh, wow. That's a really good question.
It could be anything.
Yeah. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is as it relates to the concept of stress drills.
Yeah.
And, elevating heart rate and, try and become sort of have a training experience that's adjacent to the experience of being under stress, in a potential real scenario. And I think just the way that we approach those things back in the beginning when I first started training, particularly along those lines, my thinking has shifted on it as far as what has to happen for it to be an opportunity for somebody to pressure test themselves, if you will. Yeah. And I'm still restructuring it mentally, because it's like, okay, so what we understand about the concept of adrenalization, and that it's actually, a hormonal cocktail, and it's tied to a couple of different things. And for example, so here I'm going to do this for a second. A common term that's used in treatment, maybe is a good word, or intervention with post-traumatic stress, particularly with individuals with military background, is to use the term or the phrase, the amygdala hijack. Yeah. As the amygdala is like, I got you now, and everything else starts to spin. And because we focus so much on the amygdala as being the fear center of the brain, and that like that's it. It's here's your amygdala, and all the things happen in there. And it's so hard because we have to reduce these down into sound bites and phrases that we can say a phrase, and then it means all of this stuff, and then we know that. But it's not just the amygdala, right? There's a system of interactions there. And so if I want to create opportunities for people to be pressed for whatever the training goal is, then it doesn't just have to be that high elevated heart rate. Like, I'll give you an example of, and it was a fantastic drill. So I'm not knocking the drill at all. As I was training camp, and we had an evening, thing for people just wanted to come play. And the hotel was located on a beach and all that kind of fun stuff. So we went out into the water and we did a bunch of kind of fun, just sort of exercise movement stuff in chest deep water and the waves. And it was really interesting. And then we did a stress drills. So we did a really basic sort of choke kind of situation. It was ground choke dynamics. Somebody's choking you, but driving you under the water and holding you against the floor of the ocean. And while you release the choke, and then you release the choke, you get up, you run out of the water, you get to the beach, you do, it was like 10 or 15 burpees, and then you run back, and then here we go again. So you absolutely elevated the heart rate, added a level of stress in the sense that because rabbit trails are so easy to follow here. That particular choke attack we're working on, in reality, you got a few seconds because of the way it's executed. It's not like you're going to be lights out in 2 seconds, but because then we added the layer of you can't breathe at all because you're underwater. So it was a really cool drill and exercise because of all the fun nuances that were associated with it. And you're done, you're gassed, like 2 reps. You're like, okay, excuse me, I need about 30, especially if you're an older human, which I was at the time. And so that was like, this is the piece de resistance of the stress pressure, drill. But we can do other stuff too. That's not because, understanding the chemistry in the brain and all that kind of stuff and what's actually happening with the body. We don't have to take everybody to a beach and choke them underwater, which might be a little bit much depending on who you are. So.
Yeah. I'll give an example of mine. I learned about the triune brain theory decades ago. I mean, I think it's maybe 25 years ago, longer. There was this book, something along the lines of Dinosaurs at Work or something along those lines. And the author, I forget who it was, explained it like you've got a dinosaur brain, you've got a human brain, blah, blah, blah. And he basically gives the triune brain theory. We now know that it's not that simple, that theory is not really all that accurate. But I think it's still a really easy way to bring across certain concepts to people. And for that, I think it still has a use, provided you, and that's what I always do when I'm teaching courses and classes now, is I say, look, this isn't scientifically correct, but you'll get what I mean when we get to the next part. When I say, like, look, you're being emotional now, you're being triggered into reacting emotionally, you're not thinking rationally, because otherwise you would have seen the knife in my hand and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And so the guy who I'm aware of anyway, as far as like looking at the research, who came up with the model was a researcher. Last name was McLean, and he was one of the first kind of neuroscience guys, neurobiology guys back in 50s, 60s. And he came up with this as an evolutionary design model. And that's what we know is like completely wrong. And the brain is a system. So it's not just this center does this, right? It's interactive. But to your point, it's a great heuristic because it takes all of this complexity and I can bring it down to something that serves as, like, I can say monkey brain, right? And you can go, check, got it.
Yep.
And so same thing, I use that but I use it as a heuristic. And because it's a quick backdoor into something that we could get a master's degree in.
Yeah.
And we're using it as a touchstone, for quick points of reference. That's a really good example of that concept, as far as like things that we used to believe were true scientifically and have evolved, and we know they're not anymore. And, what do we do with that? Do we, we need to acknowledge that we've moved on scientifically. We know better now.
Yeah.
And we can still make use of that because it was super useful. People really anchored into it, from that perspective. So that's a really good example.
Do you ever feel like, doing scientific research, is that something you'd be interested in, given that maybe there's not as much specifically for self-defense? That I'd like to see a lot more research, but it's not an easy thing to get grants for, I guess. But would that be something you'd be interested in?
I would be. I had a in another life, I would have totally been a researcher. I'm glad I didn't go down that path, because I can just absolutely lose sight of the rest of the world around me when I go down those rabbit holes. I probably would not have had a family. I'd have lived at the lab 24/7. That'd have been the end of me. So, but I did have a guy who's a prof at either Washington University or St. Louis University in St. Louis. I can't remember which, because we talked about both, that I met this past summer. And he's a researcher and he's a martial artist, and is pitched like, hey, if we could find some grant money, would you want to try and do a study? Because there are very few that I have found studies, and they're going to be tough to run, because you almost running a quantitative study is going to be tough because of the control factors and the ethics of, like, how valid is this self-defense training 10 years down the road? Or 10 years down the road, are we going to go literally attack one of the study participants and see what happens? Like, the ethics on that, probably not going to get that past a review board. But, there's a lot of other ways that we can quasi-assess things, particularly if we slide over to that qualitative research side of the house. And you're right. I just don't think the money's there for it. That's where if you have research, it's because there's money for it. There has to be, you got to have something to back up the time, and if you need technology or access to anything, that costs money.
Yeah.
It'd be good to have more of it, though, because there's so little.
Yeah. And that's, when I look at when I started, training and getting interested in martial arts self-defense, there was not much. There were folks like, Mark McKeown, Peyton Quinn, guys like that, who were writing books, but that very little to do with the science, obviously, of the day, and more speaking from experience. And we've steadily seen an increase in people who, we had the whole reality-based self-defense wave that happened. What is that, like the 90s or something? I lose track, because there's been so many, hype cycles of stuff that I'm like, okay, whatever. But and now there's, and this always is something, like when people say, like, yeah, but you're a part of it, the self-defense industry. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm in the industry. So it's not really my thing. But what I mean is that there's been so many changes from just a few handful of people writing books to what we have now, with people who actually doing really interesting stuff that is based on science and experience and so on. Contrast that with the beginning, and then I would just love for there to be more that is less just somebody doing whatever, and more like, well, actually, we have some scientific reasons for why X, Y, and Z works, or why you can do it this way. Doesn't mean that your way can't work, but there's maybe something better out there that is based on the science as we know it. And if it changes in 10 years, fine, we can adapt. And a friend of mine likes to say, what if in your martial arts change is built in? How would that change the way you view things? And I think that's a really good way of viewing it. I'm going to take, okay, you want to say something? Because it looks like
I'm thinking, that's all.
Okay, because for the people who are only listening as opposed to watching us on YouTube, I saw Tammy like something was going to happen, and I didn't want to cut you off. But I'm going to let you think about that, and in the meantime, I'll ask my next question. And I wanted to talk about 500 Rising. I hope I'm not going to butcher it, but if I have it right, it was during the Me Too period, and Oprah said something, I forgot exactly what, but you wrote this blog post that I really liked, and you said, look, Oprah, it's all fine what you're saying here, but what is changing actually? This doesn't change anything. How about give me 500 women, give me 500 instructors, and we'll make a change. And I remember back in the day, like, A, I really like this idea. B, that's going to be really tough. And C, a lot of people will say, yeah, Tammy, with the pom-poms and wave and be your cheerleader. But Then it's a matter of execution and pulling it off. And now we're a bunch of years later, and from my perspective, it looks like it's going quite well. So could you talk a little bit from the early days of 500 Rising to today? How's it been?
Yeah, I'd love to. Obviously, this is my passion project right now for sure. And your explanation of your own internal process on that is fully accurate, because there's everybody will get onto a concept like, hey, this is a great idea, let's do this. And that's actually how it got started in the first place. Was a friend of mine read the blog and was like, you should do this. I'm like, or somebody should do this. And I was like, yep, somebody should. She's like, no, you should do this. I'm like, nah, I have so many things I'm doing right now. And I guess we went ahead and put a stake in the ground to get started on it, mostly to see what would happen. Is it mostly going to be people cheering in the sidelines, and when it comes time to do the hard work, then we come up with, basically we have a board of 3 right now, so it's just the 3 of us. Is that what happens? And sometimes the only way to find out is to just go ahead and do it and see what happens. And if it falls, it falls, and you can go, okay, we gave it a shot, and, move on. And so that's, I think, where we decided to go ahead and see what would happen with it. We have, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me right now. I did have them back in August, and we've had additional training since then. We're actually slowly but surely training, having people step up and train into the instructor development process. We've done a handful of courses, a handful of courses in the US. And I'm trying to think how many, 6, maybe. So under 10 level 1s, but we're over 5. I know that much. We've done 1 level 1 in the UK. We have another one scheduled for March of 2023. And then the goal would be to do a level 2 sometime towards the end of 2023, because not everybody who does level 1's, going to rise up and keep going. And and we're also now, there's some debate within the community, 500 community, of like, okay, how do we count the number? Because we do need 500, like if we're going to create that tipping point change, 500 people out there in their community sharing information, whether it's proactive or it's physical or whatever. And that's our benchmark. But one of our board members made a declaration some time ago that when we hit the 500 mark, she's going to get a tattoo. And so now there's some discussion about, well, maybe we should be counting like just 500 people who've gone through 500 Rising trainings. And because then we get there a little bit faster on the tattoo. So it's sort of a fun side note. And I bring that up because if we start looking at that side of the house, between things that we've done locally, and we're not tracking those numbers officially, so that might be one of the things we start to do next year, as far as actually tracking people who are going to workshops and seminars that are being done by 500 Rising colleagues and instructors. How many people are we reaching? And that'd be a good metric to have when we have only done that informally. But we've got a couple of folks who've just been killing it, and they're doing workshops like 1 a month in different locations. And that is, for the amount of time that we've been functionally operational, my mind is blown. I did not expect that we would pick up the traction that we have in the amount of
that's
time.
with COVID happening for the past 2 years, where teaching and seminars was really difficult.
Yeah. We announced our first level 1 course in October, and it was scheduled for that upcoming March. And then March, COVID hit. Actually, it was scheduled for April, and then COVID started shutting everything down. So our first course was in June. It got pushed, of the first big year of the pandemic. Not a great way to launch something. I don't recommend it. And yet, you know, here we are, we've got some traction, and we're getting emails. I just did a Zoom call a couple of weeks ago that was introduced by somebody who's over in Europe, who's a huge part of what we're doing right now, a gentleman actually. And he facilitated a conversation with a guy in Dallas, Fort Worth, who's connected into a bunch of the police departments and stuff like that down there. And, so that's this slow creep has created an unprecedented, in my experience, traction for what we are doing in the way that we're doing it.
Yeah. Could you, for the people who are not aware of what 500 Rising is, just give a brief description of what those courses are about? What's the goal?
Sure. So the level 1 course is 4 days, 3 in person, 1 day is online, asynchronously. And it is primarily the first course towards instructor certification, if you decide that that's the route you want to go in credentialing with us organizationally from Women's Self-Defense. And it is also a crash course in women's self-defense. So we have had people in every course we've done so far, we've had people go through it just for the information.
Yeah.
They have no interest. Like, I'm not teaching, I'm not, I just wanted the information. And so that's not precluded, like, if that's what you want to do, go ahead, come play. And so we go through a lot of the proactive self-defense, preventative kinds of concepts, and into some of the science and how we're wired as humans, and the psychology and sociology of aggression and violence and relationship and all of those factors, and talk about things like the reality of, if an event does take place, there's a whole protracted aftermath, and we talk about that. So we do this massive education on that side, all the non-physical stuff. And then we have obviously physical skills that we look at in the course as well. But we spend more time with the physical aspect around the physics, for lack of a better term, of bodies and how they work. So that if you want to, and there's like a white paper that you get when you come to the first course on this as well, if you're from a martial arts system I have never trained in, and there are quite a few of those, I have zero basis to critique or advise you on what you teach, because I got nothing. And we're so prone in the martial arts world to say, my martial art can beat up your martial art, right? And I don't have any space for that. So we put together this 6-page document on how to assess, like, if you're going to teach a women's self-defense workshop, out of all the things, then here's some guidelines on, do I pick this out of my system and teach it in a 2-hour or 4-hour or 6-hour self-defense workshop? Or do I not? Do I say, like, oh, if you want to learn that thing, then you come play in our martial arts program, because its application is different. And so the course is designed on the physical side to really anchor into principles of physics and movement, and how to look at the primary problems that women face when it comes to the physical aspect of self-defense through that lens. And we play with that. So we look at, there are a few formal techniques, if you will, that I put in there, mostly because when I've done workshops and seminars for groups outside of my little insular community, those are the techniques that people have come up to me from other systems and have said, I don't have that. Like, we don't have that anywhere in our system. We have not even thought about that as a problem. Like, that's going into what we're doing. So we keep some of that stuff in there. But even there, we're looking at it from the perspective of, there's a comparison, for example, in that traditionally talking about how things transition and change over time as we begin to understand things. For a very long time, and I don't find it on the internet very much anymore, so maybe we're finally getting beyond this. One of the classic defenses that was taught to women and men as well, but largely demonstrated on YouTube videos as defenses for women being choked. The physics are completely horseshit about, like, they're just not going to work. And I didn't just decide that. Other people have said that as well. I tested it against a bunch of different people. I'm like, I'm done if I use that technique. And it's just because if you look at structure and the physics and how joints move and how what's the strength comparison and all those kinds of things, right? Now, this is a very high failure rate, probably worked for a few people really well, hence it became quite popular. So we talk about stuff like that when we're playing with the physical things in the course of, if you have a technique that you are in love with in teaching women self-defense, I'm not going to tell you, because I'm not the end all be all in the martial arts world, that you shouldn't teach it. However, I am going to tell you that you need to look at it through all of those aspects of the physics and look at it through the lens of all the things that we talk about socially and culturally, and is her headspace going to be available to her to do it, and all that kind of stuff. And to the physical stuff that we teach, we play through a series of techniques, but then we also just do something that a lot of people are uncomfortable doing when they teach, which is, okay, now go find where it breaks down, go screw with it, change it up as the threat, play with it from a different angle, see what happens. And then as the person who's on the working side, solve the problem.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think that is often severely lacking in much of the training, whether it's martial arts, self-defense matter, or combat sports, by the way, is that, again, quoting this friend of mine, and he says, typically when you teach an idealized circumstance. You teach the perfect scenario in which you can apply the technique. You're not supposed to stay there. You're supposed to learn a technique first, and this is you give this very clean, straight punch coming at you, and you do whatever you need to do when you apply your technique. But you rarely, if ever, encounter such a perfectly straight punch in real life. There's big haymakers, there's this half overhand, half haymaker. There's a bunch of stuff out there that is very different from that clean punch. But you're also not supposed to go from the ideal scenario to real life in one quick step. And in that regard, training, experimenting, seeing where it breaks, but most importantly, seeing how you have to adapt as different parameters change, which is the whole point. It's not about the technique; it's about a skill, developing skill at certain aspects of techniques or however you want to define it. But this going through that process. Okay, well, the guy is actually, a foot taller than I am. So what am I going to do now? Or he outweighs me by 60, 70 pounds. Okay, how does that change, the impact that I might receive? I'm standing on a slippery surface. How does that change things? I'm in a narrow hallway. All things that don't matter in the dojo where you have plenty of room and are on mats and you're warmed up. But all of a sudden, it's a big deal in real life. And if you have to experiment then, that's going to be quite difficult to get to a successful resolution of the conflict. So
100%.
I'm with you.
Yeah. In fact, we talk quite a bit about, there's sound bites that we anchor into. And one of those is, if you're teaching something that's technical, like I'm teaching a technique, this little package, and you don't know where the breakdown is or where the failure points could be, don't teach it in women's self-defense, because, and this is the other aspect of the level 1 course, we anchor a lot into and I will say unfortunate reality, because that's how I judge it, but it's just a reality that the majority of women are not going to train for an extended period of time. Their lives and the culture around them just does not support it. So you're going to get them for a workshop. That's it. And the number of women, when I do a women's only workshop, like, how many of you guys have ever done something like this before? And the older women will throw a hand up, a couple of them are like, great, when did you do that? In college, 25 years ago, and it was a 2-hour workshop. So that is our reality. And I railed against that truth for a long time. And it's like, no, we can change that. And it's like, well, maybe in some other universe, in some other lifetime, it's not going to happen in mine. So if we're going to make a true impact in the statistics, we have to deal with the reality in front of us, which is the majority of women who are going to come to training are women who are going to come to a workshop. If you're really lucky, a 2-day like camp, kind of a situation. And so we need to, this goes back to what you pick and choose to teach in a 2-hour or 4-hour self-defense class is going to be, because this may be the only time they're ever in front of anything like this.
Yeah.
So what do we give them? And to be clear, is this like a survey workshop where I'm going to teach you 10 different cool things, because then you might want to come sign up and train for a long period of time. Okay. But that's how many of them are going to actually do that? Very small number. And that's kind of, we have to get away from that. Offering the training as, here it is a complete package. If I only ever have you for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of the conversation, dialogue, debate that will come up in a level 1 course, it starts to reveal the grind against, well, but they need to train for 6 months to a year. It's like, okay, but they're not going to.
Yeah.
So years ago, I read an article written by a woman who certainly predates me in the self-defense world, and I don't remember her name right now, who's like, why I no longer teach women self-defense. And that was why, like, they're going to come to this 2-hour workshop and then never train again. And, they should train. It's like, yeah, they should. However, that's not going to happen. So we can go down that path and say, well, I'm just not going to do it anymore then, because I'm not going to give you 2 hours, right? Because you need 6 months. To me, that feels like a very throw the baby out with the bathwater way of approaching it. The reality is she's going to come for a workshop. And so we need to teach within that context for it to be useful and valuable. So I had somebody brought up a conversation too about common in self-defense and martial arts when we start talking about certain problems and dealing with those at the physical level. And somebody will inevitably say, well, why does she, why would you let them get that close? And that came up in a course not too long ago. And what was so amazing was I didn't have to field the question, because I had a seasoned instructor in the room who said, so, basically there was some personal disclosure involved, but like, hi, you live with this person. It's 2:00 a.m. You're dead asleep, and you wake up to, and that makes it sound like I'm couching a sexual assault situation, which is not what it was, but I don't want to disclose somebody else's story. And so that's how they get that close. They're already there, So if we have to take some of the common arguments and dissents that we have about why or what we teach and what we don't teach, and reframe the reality to what is, as opposed to what we would like it to be.
And how do you do that? And I'll give two quick examples of what I do, because I've run into the same problem. I started teaching women's self-defense courses many years ago, and over the years experienced the same thing. You only have a limited amount of time, so how to make the most out of it. And what I do nowadays mostly is giving them experiences, like this is what it feels like, or this is what it feels like when you actually don't hold back and try to do something full power, and show you that you could actually, hurt a guy like that. Obviously, all the caveats. If he knocks your block off first, it's not going to work. But teaching women that I don't like to use the word empowerment, because I think it's gotten abused so much. But more like, just because he's bigger and stronger doesn't mean you have to give up. Doesn't mean you just have to accept it. That's it, I'm done. you can actually, fight back, and many women do so successfully. So I give them experiences like, this is what it feels like. Now you know that it can be done. I don't have you long enough to teach you all the possible technical ways that you could achieve that goal, but the mindset, the seed of that idea is now, it's a truth. You know it can be done because you've done it with me. And the other thing that I do is I use a lot of CCTV footage, like show like, okay, and typically also use like clips from movies or stuff like that. Like, okay, this is what Hollywood says. This is real life. This is what you see over and over for decades on TV and on the silver screen. And this is actually how these kind of assaults and attacks do happen. So what can we learn from this specific example of a guy that is beating up a woman? What can you learn from that? And this goes all the way back to my college years when I was learning Latin. And one of the teachers said that once we get to the difficult grammar, he says, look, there's a way to remember this. And the way is, there's a difficult grammar rule. You learn a phrase in Latin by heart in which the grammar rule is applied. You learn the example by heart. If you can remember the example, it's demonstrated in the example what the rule is. So you can remember the rule much better and then apply it elsewhere. And I saw that years later with one of my teachers, Paul Orlando. He shows the technique. He says, look, this technique may not be the best technique, but it is the best example of the principle that we're learning. So that's my take. So how do you go about doing that? And I know it's a difficult question.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to sound like a Facebook meme right now. In the self-defense world, we'll start the answer with, it depends. But it does. And if I only have you for 2 hours, it goes to assessing who the you are, like who is this group, and programming accordingly. I insist now, and some of the people who have hooked their wagon to what we're doing with 500 Rising are starting to do this as well, is even if I only have 2 hours, you're going to get some proactive information. Yep. Even if it's just me and a whiteboard, you're going to get a couple of words about understanding what's happening. Because when you talked about going to mindset of like, now you know, right? You had that experience with me, now you know. There are a lot of inroads into mindset. One of those is that sort of that pressure testing physical experience. We got you all trussed up in whatever protective gear, that you as the guy are going to wear, and, we go at it. That's a tiny piece though, because there's, back to the research and the science, we know, for example, that women's brains are wired, and this is not to say that men's brains are not. We know that women's brains are wired to pick up on small details in the environment that otherwise are disconnected information and pull them together in microseconds and go, I need to be paying attention to something right now. I'm not sure why. Yeah. And so women's brains are wired to be really good at threat assessment. Their brains are wired to respond well with a prefrontal cortex still attached under stress for a period of time. Generally speaking, they have more thinking going on than men do in that flashpoint. And there's a whole list of that kind of stuff. So on the proactive side, like, hey, this is how you're wired. Like, this is built into your operating system. And a lot of women, because we live in a postmodern world, generally speaking, are like, oh, really? Right. So then being able to give examples of in everyday life, like outside of, the high stress, high risk environment situations. So that builds mindset. So everything that we do has got at least a couple minutes of that education side, because that education has to offset all the social programming, because it's so powerful. And then on the physical side, we really focus, especially if I only have you for 2 hours, on just playing with the physics. I'm a big fan of Rory Miller's one-step game, and we use it in a very specific way in the 500 Rising curriculum, and bringing in things like, sorry, just completely all over the map here, but things that you're talking about, like, okay, he's bigger and stronger, but you don't have to give up. There are options here. There's possibilities. How do you generate power as a person? So as an instructor, how can I teach power generation in a way, may not be the best, like you're talking about the technique. This may not be the best technique for the situation. However, I can teach power generation in a way that applies to a standing situation. The same approach applies to the ground. The same approach applies to standing trapped and ground trapped. So that's how we teach power generation, because I only have you for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So
makes sense.
We work to distill the information down. And of course, the longer we have, the more we get to play with, or of a specific group. We have a mother-daughter organization here in the DC metro area out of the Sikh community. And we worked with them pre-COVID, and they're coming back in to work with us again. And they come in a couple times a year. And I will tell this story because this was one of those like frying pan on the head moments for me, because I was absolutely speechless, which doesn't happen very often. When the woman who runs this organization called the very first time, she said, we'd like to set up a private group training session. This is who we are, blah, blah. And she's like, and around self-defense. However, you cannot teach them to hurt anyone. Yes, that was my reaction. Thankfully, I was on the phone, because I'm like, you do know who you called, right? I was absolutely speechless for more than a few seconds. And as a shortfall on my part personally, I kind of couldn't get over myself, honestly, with it. And so I had a wonderful dynamic female instructor who's still involved. She's part of 500 now. And I called her. I'm like, so here's the thing. I have this group. You want to take that on? Because I got nothing. And she was like, sure, I'll have a conversation and see what we can find out. And so she dug in and had lots of dialogue with them, and discovered its mindset and faith, their spirituality. And so we had to find ways to work within that context. And then, so, that's one of those frying pan moments where I was like, okay, the fact that I literally have fallen completely short on being able to walk this out with her is a massive problem, right? That's a shortcoming on our part. So that was one of the moments that sent me off digging and researching and all that kind of good stuff as well. And then, so dialing this forward, because obviously that was very pivotal for me, and it's got some influence on how we've developed what we've done, is when Amy, who's the instructor, was working with them, one of the things after their first session, I was like, okay, how'd it go? And she's like, they loved it. They're coming back. Phew. Okay, that's good. And she said, and she brought up one of the questions from one of the girls was like, so what do I do with X, Y, and Z? And the problem was, how do you defend somebody who's going to come up with a big pair of scissors and cut your hair? And Amy's response was authentically like, are we worried about that? And the answer was yes, authentically, we're very worried about that, because they don't cut their hair, and there's something very powerful about the length of their hair. Yeah. And as a result, that's a type of assault in their community. Yeah. Right? So dialing that forward, there is no way in any instructor training program that we're going to offer to people who want to go teach women's self-defense solutions to stuff like that, right? Yeah. There's just, those nuances are just hundreds of thousands of them out there in the world. So what I want to do is equip you to know the big picture of physics and bodies and movement and understanding and the sociological and psychological dynamic, that you can, one, be comfortable enough to ask that first question, which was, are we worried about this? Like, because sometimes with 13, 14-year-old kids, you get the like Hollywood what if questions, like, well, what if a meteorite falls on you while you're defending a gun and whatever. So to be able to ask the questions, to have the discovery, and then to have enough foundation in all of the physics and principles to be able to go, let's figure it out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And I want to ask something else, but before we do that, I do want to mention that 500 Rising is not just female instructors that
is correct.
You're making, but I mean, men obviously can have already and can become an instructor at 500 Rising, which I think is really good. There's all this talk about, diversity, inclusivity, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, for years, I've been hoping that more women would get involved in teaching self-defense from the female perspective, obviously, because, that's what is important about it. And you just mentioned the best example, like, okay, we've got this specific community. They have a specific problem to deal with. If you're not a part of that community, it probably doesn't even, come up on your radars. Like, I've got nothing. This is not something that I've ever considered, which, if we expand upon that idea, is very typical for men when it comes to female self-defense, but also vice versa, which, and I have an awesome question for you that I'd really love the answer for, but I'm going to keep that for the Patreon part. Okay. But I do have another one from one of my patrons that I'll no, I'm not going to say it here. I'm going to give you that one too in the bonus part. My question now is, you just mentioned that, we live in a postmodernist world, and increasingly what I've encountered is people who flat out attack you as an instructor and say, don't teach women to defend themselves, teach men not to rape. Yep. And I'm like, I've tried to reason with these people. Every single one of them is impossible to have a coherent discussion with, because they don't follow any structural logic that I know of. They just have emotion, outrage, and a bunch of stuff. And nowadays I'm like, screw you, because you want to create more victims. That's the end result of what you do, is more victims. Because my point is, we can talk about, problems in society and so on, but I don't know of any society in which young boys are actively taught, like, rape is the best thing ever, let's go. I don't know that. If it exists, I'd love to see that. Quite the opposite. Most societies that I've seen and that I know of is the opposite. If you rape a girl, you are in big trouble. So that's one thing. But the other aspect is then, why not both? Why not just teach men how to be, how to treat women correctly with respect and so on, and how to learn to handle your emotions and your needs and so on, and how not to be an asshole, and a bunch of other things that come along with who actually ends up raping women and why, which is a broad topic. But why not do that and teach women at the same time to defend themselves? Because until we have that utopian world where you can suddenly there's no more rape because every single man has learned not to rape, until you have a magic wand and you can snap your fingers and that happens, there's going to be rape victims, and you're creating more of them. And that pisses me off to no end, because I've worked so many times with women who have been raped and told me that afterwards, a lot of them had these aha moments where they'd been struggling for years with why me, what happened, and some of the information that I was lucky enough to be able to give them kind of clicked, like, that's why. It's not my fault. I said, no, it's not your fault. This is the dynamic that was there, and you didn't know that dynamic. Yeah. And it pisses me off because I've seen the pain, and I'm sure you have to, the hurt and the trauma that lasts for so many years. And then there's people out there pushing really hard to create more rape victims. And I find it abhorrent. And I just tell them to fuck off. It's like you're an evil person because you want more victims. I know that is not the most diplomatic of me, but I'm at the point that I no longer care because I've had too many of those discussions. They never end well. Long introduction. How do you handle that kind of problem?
It's a real problem, and it has come up in almost every course we've taught so far, where somebody who's already teaching says, so I'm running into this. And it's certainly the undiplomatic approach is an option of, statistically, you're widening the victim pool. Yeah. So that's not a great idea. And that's, when I'm not being diplomatic, I'm right there with you, 100% agree. The approach that honestly is more about kind of helping me control that aspect of my own reactivity in the conversation where is to become curious. Like, okay, so what's your fear? If a person learns to keep somebody from doing something to their body that they don't want to have happen, what are you afraid will happen? Because it's, this assumption is based on, something bad is going to happen if we teach women self-defense. And you're right. I mean, so much of this is so many people, so we live in a 15-second news world, are listening to sound bites and not thinking critically. And this sounds like a good cause. Let's get a part of that and not kind of really evaluating how do I feel about all the different bullet points that are being expressed here. The raw math, using the term loosely, is for that kind of cultural shift to take, it takes many, many, many generations at a multicultural universal level. I will not see that in my lifetime. My children will not see it in theirs. And so in the meantime, while we are working at that, which we should, let's keep going, let's keep working on that. If we do nothing on the other side, or in fact, we stop providing education and training on the self-defense side, for those people whose mindsets are never going to change. So we have to wait for those elements in that generation to literally die off. We have provided a much broader victim pool for them to choose from. Yeah. And if somebody is, and you have not had anybody really push the argument with me beyond that point yet, it'd be super curious to have a conversation with somebody who wanted to stay in on it and hold that belief, because I would love to hear, what is your solution? How do we make the victim pool smaller in the meantime, while we're waiting, let's say 150, 200 years for these massive cultural shifts to take place? And then conversely, so I do a lot of asking questions when I get that information. Like, I'm just going to ask you a question back and let you think about it and see if you have a thoughtful response for us to talk about. If we go to someplace like Zambia, one of the projects that 500 Rising is supporting right now is the construction staffing training of literally the very first safe house for women and children in the entire country. Like, it's not even finished yet. So if we go to places like that in the world we're going to wait for that culture that hasn't even really addressed domestic violence yet. Yeah. So do we just say to them, well, you've got to wait probably 400 years because, time will change and all that kind of stuff. What would you advise for the young girl there who says, how do I stop this from happening? What do you say to her?
I've never tried that approach. It's for sure something that I should. My experience with those people is that what you say makes perfect sense, but they're not reasoning with their basically logical reasoning is out the window. It's all emotion, and it's all, you're victim blaming. women shouldn't have to, and this and that. And when you say, look, for instance, one of the things that I say is look up, and I forget who I learned this from, but look up your car insurance, look up your house insurance. Well, we will get to the negligence clause eventually. Now, do you lock your door when you leave the house? Do you lock your car when you leave the car? I've actually, somebody refused to answer that question because they knew that they were stuck. And I said, look, if you do not do that, you don't lock your doors, and something from your house or car is stolen, the insurance company will not pay you out. Why? Because you're supposed to be a good steward of your house, your car, your property, and so on. You're also supposed to be a good steward of yourself. There's actually, legislation about that you can look up. There's something called like gross negligence, which is often used in trials and so on, when people are really negligent and somebody gets hurt because of it. The same applies to you. And it used to be the standard of the reasonable person, the pater familias, the good house father. That's really old. That's Roman law, if I'm not mistaken. But like, what would a reasonable person do nowadays? My biggest fear that I see with the way that self-defense cases are being tried nowadays, especially in the US, is that it's already shifted from the prosecution is supposed to prove that you're guilty. You're now supposed to prove that you're innocent, as opposed to how it used to be. And if it shifts further along those lines, where it's the reasonable person is not defending himself, because he's the reasonable person doesn't rape any woman, so it's not reasonable to learn to defend yourself, so you can't defend yourself. This kind of bizarre reasoning that I've seen in the postmodern world so much that it doesn't make any lick of sense in real life. Yet these are the folks that just they get the microphone, and everybody's like, rah rah.
And you're right. It doesn't. If we stop and we run logic chains through the dialogue, it breaks down. And when you use the example of, would you lock your car? Do you lock your house? And people then get a little tongue tied because they're like, I know where this is going. I'm about to be backed into a corner. The reality of the conversation is, from let's say a feminist perspective, is let's hold offenders accountable. Let's hold people accountable for their actions and their behavior. Yeah, 100%. And laws work when people choose to follow them.
Yep.
And there will always be people who choose not to follow them, whether it's a written law in a state or a country, or it's a generic human social behavioral social contract law. There are always people out there who are going to violate them. How many people have blown off a stop sign, right? Does that, who's responsible for blowing off the stop sign? If you get pulled over and you say to the law enforcement official standing at the window of your vehicle, well, the general rule of thumb in this neighborhood is if there's nobody else at the intersection, you can just roll through it. Are they going to go, oh yeah, you're right? No, they're going to write you a little piece of paper and you're going to have to pay money. So it's, so we all make choices like that all the time. And people are going to make bigger choices inside that same frame of reference. Yes, this is wrong. Yes, I can go to jail. Yes, I can. But all factors being a thing, it's going to happen anyway. I'm going to engage in that behavior anyway. And, being a little snarky, you can flip the conversation around and say, all right, so teaching self-defense, defensive tactics to women is victim blaming. So same thing is true for men, right? Because if we're looking at leveling the playing field, which that's what this conversation is about, leveling the playing field of accountability.
Yeah, but Tammy, you don't understand. It's the patriarchy, so men are evil anyway. And by the way, logic is an invention of, white European cis males, so doesn't count anyway.
Yeah. So, I'm such a rabbit hole. I mean, we can go way deep into history, and look at other factors that, like, do we go back to do we go back to Boudica's story and say that she shouldn't have done what she did because, that was victim blaming, like rising her people up to go eventually be slaughtered by the Romans. But in the meantime, they did a lot of damage along the way, right? That, do we say that her whole actions are victim blaming? And of course, again, like you said, it's a very emotionally driven conversation. Again, sorry about the canine chorus in the background. I am the only one home, so I am not downstairs to make that stop. So they have to run their course. It's a very frustrating dialogue because, as you said in the beginning, those who prescribe to that truth are, at least in the short run, and by that I mean 150, 200 years, are expanding the victim pool.
Yeah.
And that's heinous. That's absolutely heinous. And my fervent hope is that dies sooner than later, because it's part of the, the big tidal waves of trends.
Yeah.
And like, oh, let's jump on this one, right? And eventually it'll wash to shore and it'll dissipate and it will no longer be a big conversation.
Yeah, my prediction, if I want to make one, is that, we are we're already over the cliff. We're already into a recession. It's going to get worse for the coming years, especially in Europe. It's going to get pretty bad. Typically, when we live in times of abundance and everything is going great, then you can develop these kind of theories that really don't have to be making all that much sense because nobody's testing them. There's no pressure testing. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You can stay in your little bubble and you'll be fine seeing all that stuff. Now that the bad times are here and it's interesting. I thought it was going to happen quicker, but I can see that a lot of the predictions that I did, for instance, with Toby Cowan, we talked about, urban survival and a lot of that stuff early on in the pandemic and lately a few times as well. Very slowly, for instance, in Europe, people are like, holy crap, heating our house in the middle of winter we can't pay for it. It's too expensive. You've got people here in Belgium actually putting bed covers against the windows as a form of insulation because they're like, we're freezing and can't heat our house. When times get tough, then all these fancy theories tend to prove themselves totally useless, and people fall back on, well, what does work? And then all of a sudden, all that ancient, archaic, tribal stuff that used to be very common a few hundred years ago tends to become very important again. And it's like, oh, wow, it is actually not about, forgive me the joke, but, your lesbian dance theory degree that you have, but it's actually about how can we as a small group, as a family, as a small group, as a society, as a tribe, if in the positive sense of the word, survive in really harsh conditions. And we're getting there. And my guess is that eventually things will get bad enough that there won't be any funding left for all the, the postmodernist nonsense that we have nowadays, because people will be too busy surviving. And you won't be as open to it as you were, let's say, pre-pandemic, when life was relatively good compared to what we're increasingly having now. Because, again, you'll be too busy worrying about your job, and with massive layoffs already happening in the US, but around the world as well. And scarcity is starting to happen. And we've got the energy crisis that has yet to fully unfold. People will be like, there's a lot of violence all of a sudden because people don't have enough money. They start stealing and fighting and so on.
Yeah.
Which is what happens. It's like maybe that whole self-defense stuff is actually important. And you can say that you can stick to your ideology the first time you get mobbed and beaten up, maybe the second time, but if it's the third and fourth time when you walk around like a victim, living in your own bubble and pretending that women shouldn't have to learn how to defend themselves from muggers, teach men not to mug. And I'm like, okay, how many times do you want to get mugged because you are the ideal victim profile of those muggers with your actions and how you portray yourself. So that would be my guess.
And there's, if we follow that line of thinking, we just here in the US, in Buffalo, New York, got just really slammed by this whole weather system, and they're still up against it. And they're having looting in the stores, and because people are desperate. So it's a great little moment in time of going, when shit gets really bad, then all of the social constructs that we live by start to fall away when we have to choose between that and survival. And I wonder, something that you said made this percolate in my brain, if one of the reasons why that don't teach women self-defense, because it's a victim blaming conversation, has the energy that it has right now, is because it's so narrowly focused on just sexual violence.
Yeah.
And right, so that then it's sexual violence, and therefore we have to look at who are the primary offenders, and it's primarily men, and yada yada, and then we fall into that whole feminist narrative. And the flat statement of people shouldn't do that to other people, 100% people should not do that to other people. And it's a much bigger conversation than that.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's where, as if we do see things get worse, we'll see people shift. We've already had an increase in inquiries at the local training center from, I had a woman, in fact, reach out to inquire about coming in for a trial class just before we closed for the holidays, and made a comment about having been sort of mugged, kind of a situation, having moved to the DC metro area after having lived in New York City. And she's like, I walked, through the streets of Hell's Kitchen without a concern. And, people just don't treat women very well here, do they? And it was just a really interesting comment, because it got me thinking about how we do tend to think like here people are treated well, therefore people are treated well everywhere. And I'm not saying that that's categorically true about New York City. That was just her comparative in her experience. But, we have these expectations set on our cultural bias.
Yeah.
And nobody, to be blunt, gives a rat's ass about your cultural bias if they have a strong motivator for nefarious action.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate that I've been able to travel very a lot actually over the years, and been to a bunch of continents, third world countries. I was in Russia around the time when Yeltsin came to power, and saw third world poverty there, really harsh living conditions. And just to give you, what you said about cultural bias and so on, they implored us in the hotel, do not go out at night. When it's dark, stay here, because we will not see you back. And it wasn't them trying to get money out of us. It's just like, please don't go. Please don't go, because we know that you won't be back, and probably will get in trouble as well. But and just that mindset is that, okay, when it's dark, you don't go outside. For a lot of people, it's like, yeah, but it's my right. And of course it's your right, but we won't see you again. You will be gone. Yeah, but no, there is no yeah, but after you die. And everything else is, we're done talking. And
That's good.
Unfortunately, a lot of people, I think, will and unfortunately, many young people will have to relearn that lesson that, your little bubble of society, what you've seen, what you've experienced, is not everything there is out there. There is, what is it? There is more things under heaven and earth than dreamt of in your philosophy. If I'm not mistaken, is the quote from Shakespeare. And I think that's something that everybody should have in his on a wall in your office or wherever you are. Read it every now and then. The world is bigger than you. Anyway, I want to get to the bonus part of Patreon, but what's next for 500 Rising? Well, what are the plans? Except for, you mentioned the seminars that are upcoming, but if you look out into the future.
So we have some exciting things happening that are going to be hopefully very supportive for our colleagues and instructors. We got our nonprofit status in the US in June, and because it takes a while. And the watershed effect of that, just in sort of, it's in who right? People introduce you to other people. We've been connected to a project at the big university in West Virginia, because that's where the nonprofit is seated. And their tech program, their upper level students are going to be developing an app for our resource library, which is, you have to log in now to get to it as part of the website. And that's one of the things that we've been really want to provide and grow and make massively robust is resources for people who are teaching, or just, I want to go back and listen to this conversation again, or that lecture again, or what have you. And that you can just, there it is right there on your phone. So that's very exciting. And the sideline that goes with that, because of how that came to be, is we have some fundraising goals. And as a nonprofit now, people can receive benefit, at least here in the US. It helps your taxes substantially if you give to a nonprofit, to a charity. And with those fundraising goals, we want to do more, get some folks that we can pay, because it's all volunteer work right now, to do more social media education pieces. Like we want to train instructors, we want to provide education and training, we want to provide workshops and seminars and support people who are going to do that. But at the end of the day, we're an education organization. And I'd love to just be able to flood the social media with education, information, sound bites, things that are useful, both for instructors as well as for the general population. And our most immediate goal through next year, fundraising, developing, we've got some additional products we're going to develop. And one of those is another instructor development track. I don't know that it will be done by the end of 2023, but that people can access non-locally. So I don't have to get on a plane or in a car or whatever. I can do it all online. And it's the educator side. It's the proactive, the education stuff. And with that, it involves the conflict communication training that Rory Miller and Mark McYoung originally developed, because Miller has assigned that, he's given that to 500 Rising. So we'll be the certifying body for conflict communication instructors. So we want to envelop that into a bigger education certification training program, because that really speaks to the physical stuff. I love it. I train, I'm a physical person, but if we're going to put our money where our mouth is, if we're only teaching physical stuff and women's self-defense, there's a subtext that says, this is the only time you get to have a skill is when it's already gone bad.
Yeah.
So how about let's focus on the rest of it, all the rest of it, and really focus on getting people into the experience of fun and engaging and dynamic education, so that the physical skills are like, 10%.
Yeah.
So those are projected goals for us in getting in those pieces going and getting the board expanded. We need more humans.
That sounds really interesting. And I think, like you mentioned, like an app like that, or, an online course, I think that would be great. I mean, I unfortunately don't get to travel as much as I used to, but I'd love to attend one of the seminars. But I think that's where it's at nowadays. I mean, putting stuff online and having it accessible. I think that's one good thing that came out of the pandemic, just, Zoom calls and online sessions, that's more something that is accepted nowadays as a valid alternative, even though, I think live is still best. But please tell me that eventually you're going to bring out a book. Please tell me that you're writing something.
So you're like the fourth person in the last 6 months who said that to me. And, what I struggle with, and I have random notes on, you can't see this, but the monitors that are above our conversation are covered with pink, blue, dark blue, orange sticky notes, like everywhere, is how my brain works, of thoughts and ideas. And, what I struggle with, honestly, is that from a whole self-defense education kind of side of the house, it's already been done. So it's like, I don't have I don't want to waste people's time. There's nothing new to say. My head goes to that place.
Can I interrupt you? I've had this
Sure.
very same conversation with my girlfriend many times. She's an excellent cook. I've been begging her for years, write a cookbook. Yeah, but there are thousands coming out, have come out already, and who am I, and this and that. And I'm like, yes, and thousands more will be written. It's not that it hasn't been done before. It's that you haven't done it before. Your own specific input, the way you view things and so on, which will be unique to you. And I think that's the value. There will be stuff that is obviously repetition, but there will be some new insights that you bring. I'm sure it's not going to be the only thing, but if only in the way you present things, in the way you phrase things, and so on. The examples that you use, the way you structure your curriculum or your book, or and so on. So that's my take. I remember starting to write. I was like, who the hell wants to read any of my stuff? I mean, look at all the other people out there, and we are now 20 years later, and I'm still writing. But I encounter this a lot, this mindset, and I fully understand. I don't want to push you, obviously, but I think it would be really good if you would write something, if only just like a condensed version of like one of the first courses in 500 Rising, like in book format. Doesn't have to be, obviously you can't do anything there, but like something along those lines. You can, even if you have here's an idea. So you tape all the instructional parts that you do in one of the courses, and then you automatically transcribe it into text. You download it as an MP3 file, and there's a bunch of software that you can use nowadays that just automatically puts it into text, and you don't even have to dictate. You were teaching, and you've got half a book right there. Then it's just a matter of structuring and adapting.
That's a very dangerous recommendation, because when we were in the UK, the first time, there was a gentleman who volunteered his immense background in film and videography, and he sat there and he filmed. So that's already been done. We have all that. There will eventually be something. I think part of my problem is also sifting and sorting it in like batches of information. And because as you can tell just by this conversation, you say one thing and I'm like, look, like, and there's this and there's that. And
there's a solution to that, Tammy, and it's write several books.
Thanks for that.
I'm sorry. No, I'm the same. My last book is obviously a few years old now, Boxing for Self-Defense. It was supposed to be one book, and the more that I wrote, the more I was like, there's no way I can fit this into one book, because nobody buys an encyclopedia. Nobody buys huge books. I was like, oh, it's going to be 2 books. And then, no, it's going to be 3 books. No, it's going to be 3.5 books. So, and I fully understand that. I was very fortunate to have Lauren Christensen take me under his wing and teach me a lot about writing and learning how to kind of focus on certain aspects of a topic. And I think that is I think where, I mean, what you teach would be really great if you just focus on certain things. I think that would be very valuable for especially for a lot of women, obviously, because it comes from a woman with your background, with the academic accomplishments that you have, and then all the experience teaching. It shouldn't come from a guy like me. That's what I mean. Because it's not a guy telling us women what to do. It's like, who the hell are you? Like, well, actually, there's somebody else who has a great book that you can read. Anyway, that's I'm going to stop now. But just so you know, I think that's
it's been taken under advisement.
Okay, that's right. We should get to the bonus section, because I think we're at the 90-minute mark now. I will put the link to the website of 500 Rising to the show notes. And for the people watching or listening, if you go to the description, there will be a link to wimsblog.com and then / the number of the episode. I'm not quite sure when this one will air. And you will head over to my blog, the page for this episode, and it will have all the links and all the stuff that we mentioned. So 500 Rising. Anything else that you would like me to mention, to put there?
No, that would be great. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook.
Okay.
And
I'll put the socials in there as well.
Yeah, we'd love the IG follow, because the way the algorithm works is until you get a certain number of followers on there, you just don't show up. And we really want to use that as just a general education platform. So that'd be cool.
Okay. I just took a note down, and I will add that as well. All right, Tammy, thank you so much. This was awesome as always. For the people listening, I mean, check out 500 Rising. If you can attend one of the courses, by all means, please do so. Again, man, woman, doesn't matter. If you want to be an instructor or not, doesn't matter. Just attend, and it's definitely worth your time. And with that, I am going to leave everybody. We're going to say bye, and we continue in the bonus section on Patreon. Again, the link will be in the show notes. Thanks, everybody.